The heavy oak panel clicked shut, sealing us in the pitch-black stone tunnel. Above us, the deafening sound of shattering wood and heavy combat boots vibrated through the ceiling. I stood frozen in the suffocating dark, listening to the tactical extraction team hunting us. Camilla stepped into my space, her fingers gripping the collar of my coat with terrifying possessiveness. Her other hand hung at her side, gripping a matte black tactical sidearm. "I won't let them take you, Nadia," she whispered, her breath warm against my freezing skin. "I will burn the entire world down before I let them control me." She pulled me flush against her body, entirely ignoring the mercenaries tearing the house apart above us. She crashed her lips against mine, a desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss that tasted like survival. Then, the hidden door at the top of the stairs violently exploded. The storm always feels the quietest right after it breaks the world apart. It had been exactly 72 hours since I walked into the Vance corporate boardroom and detonated a financial nuclear bomb. 72 hours since Richard Vance, the untouchable architect of a ruthless billionaire dynasty, was escorted out of his own glass fortress in cold steel handcuffs. And 72 hours since the Alpha Queen kissed me in front of the flashing cameras, entirely rewriting the rules of our existence. We were currently 300 miles away from the smoking crater of the Manhattan Financial District. Elias, utilizing every underground connection he possessed, had arranged a flawless ghost property for us. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern glass and timber estate perched on a jagged cliff overlooking the violent, freezing Atlantic Ocean. There were no paparazzi hiding in the dense pine forests. There were no board members screaming about plummeting stock prices. There was only the hypnotic, rhythmic crashing of the waves against the dark rocks far below, and the heavy, intoxicating silence of absolute isolation. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in the master bedroom, holding a steaming mug of black coffee, watching the morning mist roll in off the water. I was wearing a thick, oversized cashmere sweater that belonged to Camilla, the sleeves pushed up past my elbows. The deep, lingering scent of crushed bergamot and dark cedar was woven into the very fabric of the wool, wrapping around me like a protective shield. The cynical, battle-hardened underground escort who had sold her nights to survive felt like a distant memory, a ghost I had finally managed to lay to rest. I turned my head slightly, looking back toward the center of the massive room. Camilla was still asleep. She was tangled in the dark gray linen sheets, her pale blonde hair cascading beautifully across the pillows like spilled silk. The harsh, aristocratic lines of her face, usually locked in a terrifying mask of corporate intimidation, were completely relaxed. She didn't look like the Ice Queen of Wall Street. She looked soft, entirely unguarded, and breathtakingly peaceful. The last 3 days had been a blur of exhaustion, whispered confessions, and an intense, desperate kind of healing. We had spent hours simply holding each other in the quiet rooms of the estate, slowly unspooling the heavy, traumatic threads of the lives we had both left behind. I had mapped every hidden vulnerability beneath her flawless armor, and she had systematically dismantled every wall I had built to protect my own deeply guarded heart. The fake contract was ashes, and what remained was a reality so terrifyingly beautiful it almost hurt to acknowledge. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, a warm, unfamiliar sense of absolute contentment blooming in my chest. But even as I watched her sleep, a faint, nagging shadow of unease flickered at the edge of my mind. In the underground world, I had learned one absolute, unforgiving truth: nature abhors a vacuum. And the power vacuum left behind by Richard Vance's sudden, catastrophic downfall was massive enough to swallow entire cities. Someone was going to step into that void. Someone was going to try and claim the fragmented remains of the empire. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that Camilla was the only legitimate heir left standing on the board. A sudden, sharp buzzing sound shattered the morning quiet. It wasn't my burner phone. It was a sleek, encrypted satellite phone Elias had left for extreme emergencies, resting on the glass nightstand next to the bed. The vibration was incredibly loud against the glass surface. Camilla shifted in her sleep, her brow furrowing slightly at the intrusive noise. I set my coffee mug down on the windowsill and moved quickly across the room, my bare feet silent against the heated hardwood floor. I grabbed the phone before it could buzz a third time, stepping out onto the adjoining crowded balcony and sliding the heavy glass door shut behind me. The freezing ocean wind immediately bit into my skin, whipping my dark hair around my face. I stared at the glowing screen. There was no caller 499, just a string of flashing, encrypted zeros. Only 2 people in the world had this exact frequency: Elias and Marcus. I pressed the green button, lifting the cold metal to my ear. "Elias?" I asked, keeping my voice low, my eyes scanning the empty, foggy coastline. "Nadia?" a voice replied. My blood instantly ran entirely cold. It wasn't Elias's gruff, weathered tone, and it wasn't Marcus's nervous, frantic pitch. It was a woman's voice. It was smooth, cultured, and dripped with a terrifying, lethal elegance that made the freezing ocean wind feel warm by comparison. It possessed the kind of aristocratic authority that made Richard Vance sound like an amateur street thug. "Who is this?" I demanded, my posture instantly snapping back into the defensive, lethal stance of the underground survivor. "How did you get this secure frequency?" A soft, melodic chuckle echoed through the encrypted line. It was a sound completely devoid of genuine amusement. "The underground believes it is so very clever with its little toys," the woman murmured, her accent faintly European, sharp and polished. "But money, my dear Nadia, buys access to satellites long before it buys loyalty." I gripped the metal railing of the balcony, my knuckles turning stark white. "I will ask you one more time," I said, my voice dropping into a dangerously quiet register. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "You may call me Victoria," the woman replied smoothly. "Victoria Sterling." The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Even in the darkest VIP rooms of the Obsidian, the name Sterling was only whispered. They were a shadowy, trillion-dollar European equity syndicate. They were the apex predators of the global financial food chain. The kind of people who bought entire countries and orchestrated regime changes for sport. If Richard Vance was a shark, Victoria Sterling was the terrifying, crushing depth of the ocean itself. "I see the silence indicates you recognize the name," Victoria noted, her tone laced with dark satisfaction. "Good. It saves us a tedious introduction. Richard Vance is in federal custody," I stated, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "The Vance empire is frozen by the SEC. There is nothing left for your syndicate to acquire." "Oh, Nadia," Victoria sighed, the condescension practically dripping through the speaker. "You misunderstand the board completely. Richard was a crude, arrogant fool who got caught playing with offshore pennies. We are not interested in his frozen public assets." She paused, allowing the heavy, silent weight of her power to press down on the line. "We are interested in the Black Ledger." My breath hitched sharply in my throat. The Black Ledger. It was a myth, a ghost story told among the elite brokers in the underground. A master cryptographic key that supposedly unlocked an untraceable, decentralized network of dark money accounts, established by the founding fathers of the Vance dynasty. Accounts that bypassed every federal regulation in the world. "That's a ghost story," I lied flawlessly, forcing my voice to remain entirely steady. "It doesn't exist." "Do not insult my intelligence, little escort," Victoria snapped, the velvet dropping from her voice to reveal the razor blade underneath. "The federal investigators missed it because Richard didn't have it. He spent 5 years trying to find it, tearing his own empire apart from the inside out, but he was looking in the wrong place." I closed my eyes, the freezing wind stinging my cheeks as the terrifying reality of the situation rapidly assembled in my mind. "Camilla has it," Victoria stated softly, delivering the killing blow. Her grandfather entrusted the encrypted biometric sequence to her long before Richard took the throne. She is the only living person who can unlock the network. I turned my head, looking through the heavy glass door into the master bedroom. Camilla was awake now. She was sitting up in bed, the dark sheets pooled around her waist, rubbing her eyes sleepily. She looked so incredibly peaceful, so entirely unaware that the nightmare we had just escaped had only been the prologue. "Camilla left the corporate world," I said fiercely, turning my back to the glass. She is entirely done with the Vance legacy. She has nothing to give you. She will give me the ledger, Victoria countered, her voice returning to its smooth, lethal elegance. Or I will simply take the one thing she values more than her own life. The silence on the line stretched, thick and suffocating. I have spent the last 48 hours observing your beautiful, isolated little glass house on the cliffs, Nadia. A wave of pure, paralyzing terror washed over me. My eyes snapped open, scanning the dense pine forests and the jagged rocks below, suddenly feeling entirely exposed. We weren't hiding. We were simply waiting in a cage they hadn't bothered to lock yet. Your loyalty to the Alpha Queen is incredibly touching, Victoria mocked softly. But love makes people wonderfully predictable. I am sending a car to the coordinates of your secure property tomorrow morning at exactly 8 a.m.
Camilla will get in the car. She will bring the biometric sequence. And if she refuses, or if you attempt to run, the threat hung in the freezing air, absolute and terrifying. You won't have to worry about paying your debts ever again, Nadia, because you will simply cease to exist. The line went completely dead. The flat electronic dial tone echoed in my ear, mimicking the sudden hollow void in my chest. I lowered the satellite phone, my hand trembling so violently I almost dropped the heavy device over the balcony railing. We had burned down a billionaire patriarch to find our freedom, and in doing so, we had inadvertently signaled a global syndicate of monsters. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the terror down into the darkest, most disciplined corner of my mind. I couldn't panic. If I panicked, we were both already dead. I turned around and slid the heavy glass door open, stepping back into the warm, sunlit bedroom. Camilla looked up at me, her glacial blue eyes instantly narrowing as she registered the pale, haunted expression on my face. The soft, sleepy vulnerability vanished in a fraction of a second. The Alpha Queen sat up straight, the linen sheets falling away, her gaze sharpening into a lethal, analytical focus. "Who was on that phone, Nadia?" Camilla asked, her voice dropping into a low, commanding register. I walked slowly toward the edge of the massive bed, the satellite phone still clutched tightly in my hand. I looked down at the woman I loved, the woman I had sworn to protect. The peaceful sanctuary we had built for 3 days was officially over. "We need to pack," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, a flawless return to the cynical survivor. "The war didn't end, Camilla. It just changed hands." The silence in the master bedroom felt entirely different now. It wasn't the warm, heavy silence of two lovers hiding from a broken world. It was the suffocating, freezing silence of a trapped submarine rapidly taking on water. Camilla did not panic. She simply stared at the encrypted satellite phone in my hand, her brilliant mind already dissecting the raw terror she saw in my eyes. She slowly pushed the dark gray linen sheets aside and stood up. She was wearing one of my plain black t-shirts, but she carried herself as if she were wrapped in a tailored suit of indestructible armor. "Victoria Sterling," I said, the name tasting like poison on my tongue. I watched Camilla's face closely, waiting for the confusion or the fear to set in. Instead, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Her glacial blue eyes darkened into two sharp, terrifying chips of absolute ice. "The European Syndicate," Camilla stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. She walked gracefully across the heated hardwood floor, stopping mere inches from where I stood. "My father spent the last decade terrified of the Sterling family. They don't negotiate, Nadia. They simply devour." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to hold her intense, unwavering gaze. "She knows about the Black Ledger, Camilla." For a fraction of a second, the flawless mask of the Alpha Queen slipped. A flicker of genuine shock crossed her beautiful features, quickly followed by a dark, dangerous realization. "Richard never knew what it actually was," Camilla whispered, almost to herself. "He thought it was a physical server, a hard drive buried in a Swiss vault. He spent hundreds of millions of corporate funds hiring mercenaries to find a ghost." I reached out, gently gripping her arms, needing to ground her in the terrifying reality of our present moment. "Victoria doesn't think it's a hard drive.
She knows it's a biometric sequence. And she knows you are the only living key. Camilla looked down at my hands holding her arms, and then slowly looked back up into my eyes. The vulnerability she had shown me over the last 3 days vanished completely, locked away behind a vault of impenetrable steel. She gave us until tomorrow morning at Urt, I continued, my voice rapid and urgent. We have to leave right now. Elias can get us fake passports and a charter flight out of the country before they even realize the house is empty. We can disappear to somewhere they can't reach us. I turned toward the massive walk-in closet, my survival instincts entirely taking over. But before I could take a single step, Camilla's hand clamped down on my wrist. Her grip was ironclad, completely stopping my momentum. "No," Camilla commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a staggering, absolute authority that rooted me to the floor. I turned back to look at her, completely stunned. "Camilla, you don't understand how these people operate. They will wipe us off the face of the earth and never leave a single fingerprint." "I understand exactly how they operate, Nadia," she replied coldly. She let go of my wrist and walked past me, heading straight toward a sleek glass desk in the corner of the room. "You don't build a $1 trillion syndicate by waiting patiently for a deadline. Victoria giving us until tomorrow morning isn't a courtesy. It's a psychological tactic designed to make us run." Camilla opened the top drawer of the desk, pulling out a heavy matte black secure laptop that Elias had left for us. "If we run now, we walk blindly into whatever perimeter she has already set up on the roads leading out of this forest." I stared at the billionaire heiress, a profound sense of awe washing over my panic. She wasn't a damsel in distress waiting to be rescued by the cynical underground escort. She was the apex predator of Wall Street, and she was rapidly calculating the variables of a lethal chess game. "The Black Ledger isn't a bank account," Camilla said, flipping the laptop open and rapidly typing a complex string of code. "It is a completely decentralized, autonomous financial network. My grandfather designed it as a failsafe to burn the Vance empire to the ground if it ever fell into the wrong hands." She looked up from the glowing screen, her blue eyes piercing right through me. "If Victoria Sterling acquires my biometric sequence, she doesn't just steal money. She acquires the power to collapse the entire global market without leaving a trace." "And you are the only key," I whispered, the crushing weight of the situation finally settling over me. "Yes," Camilla confirmed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Which means my life is the ultimate leverage. But it also means I am the only one holding the detonator." Suddenly, the encrypted satellite phone still clutched in my hand vibrated sharply. It wasn't a phone call this time. It was a localized proximity alert programmed by Elias. The screen flashed a bright, angry red. "Perimeter breach," I read aloud, my blood turning to ice. "Sector 4, the private access road." Camilla didn't even flinch. "Exactly as I predicted," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the laptop screen. "They aren't waiting for tomorrow morning. They sent an advance extraction team to secure the asset while we are supposedly panicked and packing." I threw the satellite phone onto the bed and rushed to the floor-to-ceiling windows, keeping my body pressed against the wall. I peered out through the thick morning mist rolling off the Atlantic Ocean. Through the dense pine trees, I could see the faint, rhythmic sweeping of tactical headlights approaching the property gate. They were driving matte black SUVs with no license plates. There were at least 3 vehicles, and they were moving with absolute, terrifying precision. "We have less than 3 minutes before they breach the front door," I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Elias said there was a panic room in the basement," I urged, turning back to her. Camilla slammed the laptop shut and stood up. "A panic room is just a coffin with better ventilation, Nadia. We are not hiding in the dark waiting to be slaughtered." She walked swiftly to the massive stone fireplace at the center of the bedroom. She reached up, pressing her hand against a specific unnoticeable indentation in the dark gray stone. A quiet mechanical click echoed in the silent room. A section of the heavy stone wall slid smoothly to the side, revealing a hidden, climate-controlled steel cache. Inside the cache were 2 loaded tactical sidearms, spare magazines, and a heavy set of keys. My jaw dropped slightly as I stared at the hidden arsenal. "Elias isn't the only one who knows how to prepare a ghost property," Camilla stated smoothly. She reached into the cache, pulling out one of the heavy black weapons with effortless familiarity. She checked the magazine and racked the slide with a sharp, metallic clack that sent a violent shiver down my spine. The woman who used to wear pristine white tuxedos to charity galas was holding a weapon like a seasoned professional. She turned to me, offering the second weapon. I took it, the cold steel feeling strangely familiar in my hands after years of surviving the underground. "Where did you learn to do that?" I breathed, completely captivated by the lethal grace radiating from her. "My father taught me how to destroy corporate rivals," Camilla replied, her lips curving into a dark, mesmerizing smile. "My grandfather taught me how to survive an assassination attempt." She reached back into the cache and grabbed the heavy set of keys. "There is a customized armored boat docked in the private cove beneath the cliff. The access panel is concealed behind the wine cellar in the basement." She walked past me, grabbing a heavy black trench coat from the closet and throwing it over her shoulders. "We are going to make them think we are trapped on the second floor. And while they are breaching the master suite, we are going to disappear into the ocean." I stood perfectly still for a second, watching the Alpha Queen take absolute command of our survival. I had fallen in love with her vulnerability, but I was absolutely mesmerized by her ruthless intellect. "Understood," I said, pulling my own dark coat on over the oversized cashmere sweater. We moved silently out of the master bedroom, navigating the sprawling, modern corridors of the Vance estate. The morning light filtering through the windows cast long, eerie shadows across the polished floors. Downstairs, the heavy, muffled sound of a specialized breaching charge echoed through the silent house. They were already at the front door. Camilla didn't hesitate. She led the way toward the discreet servant stairs at the back of the kitchen, her movements fluid and completely silent. We descended into the pitch-black basement, the air instantly growing cold and damp. The sound of shattering glass and heavy combat boots echoed from the floor above us. They were moving fast, sweeping the living room with terrifying efficiency. We reached the massive, temperature-controlled wine cellar. Camilla bypassed the expensive vintage bottles, moving directly to the far wall composed of dark oak panels. She ran her fingers along the edge of the wood, finding the hidden biometric scanner. She pressed her thumb against the invisible sensor. The oak panel hissed softly, swinging open to reveal a dark, narrow stone tunnel carved directly into the cliffside. The smell of salt water and freezing ocean wind immediately rushed into the cellar. "Go!" Camilla whispered, ushering me into the tunnel. I stepped into the darkness, turning back just as she was about to pull the heavy oak panel shut behind her. I reached out, grabbing her hand in the dark. "Camilla," I breathed, the reality of the danger finally breaking through my adrenaline. She stepped closer, the faint light from the cellar catching the intense, fierce devotion in her eyes. Without a word, she leaned in and pressed her lips against mine. It wasn't a soft, romantic kiss. It was a fierce, demanding promise, a searing collision of heat and adrenaline in the freezing dark. It was a silent vow that we were not going to die in the shadows of this cliff. She pulled back, her eyes burning into mine. "I won't let them take you, Nadia, and I will burn the entire world down before I let them control me." She pulled the heavy oak panel shut, sealing us in the pitch-black tunnel. Above us, the heavy footsteps of the extraction team pounded against the floorboards, but we were already gone, slipping into the freezing darkness of the Atlantic, ready to turn the syndicate's hunt into a war they could never win. The heavy oak panel clicked shut behind us, plunging the tunnel into absolute, suffocating darkness. The complete absence of light was instantly disorienting, but Camilla's grip on my hand never wavered. She pulled me forward, navigating the steep, slick stone steps completely by memory. The air grew significantly colder with every step we took, heavy with the sharp, biting scent of raw ocean brine and wet earth. Above us, the muffled sounds of the tactical extraction team tearing the pristine glass estate apart vibrated through the solid rock. I could hear the distinct, heavy thud of automatic boots ticking down the doors of the master suite we had occupied just minutes ago. They were professional, they were heavily armed, and they were about to realize their multi-billion-dollar asset had vanished into thin air. "Keep your hand against the left wall,"
Camilla whispered, her voice barely carrying over the distant, echoing roar of the ocean ahead of us. The steps end abruptly in 20 paces. I did exactly as she instructed, the rough, damp stone biting into my fingertips as I carefully descended in the pitch black. The tunnel began to widen, the suffocating enclosure giving way to a massive, echoing subterranean cavern. Faint, silvery morning light pierced through a jagged opening at the far end of the cave, illuminating the violent, churning water of a hidden sea cove. Moored to a reinforced steel dock at the edge of the dark water was the escape vessel. It wasn't a standard luxury yacht. It was a sleek, matte black, military-grade interceptor, sitting low in the water like a predatory shadow. My grandfather used to say that paranoia was the only completely reliable investment strategy, Camilla stated dryly, walking swiftly toward the edge of the dock. She leapt onto the reinforced deck of the interceptor with practiced grace, immediately moving toward the enclosed, bulletproof cockpit. I followed closely behind, my tactical sidearm drawn, constantly scanning the dark shadows of the cavern behind us. The second I stepped into the cabin, Camilla engaged the biometric ignition sequence. The massive twin engines roared to life, a deep, guttural vibration that shook the entire cavern and sent a flock of nesting seabirds screaming out into the mist. "Cast off the bowline," Camilla ordered, her hands flying across the illuminated digital navigation consoles. I moved to the front of the cabin, hitting the mechanical release switch for the heavy mooring cables. The thick ropes snapped back, hitting the dock with a loud crack. Suddenly, a massive, deafening explosion shook the stone ceiling of the cavern. Dust and loose rocks rained down from above. The extraction team had found the hidden panel in the wine cellar, and they hadn't bothered to look for a biometric scanner. They had simply blown the oak wall to pieces. Through the narrow tunnel entrance, I saw the blinding sweep of high-powered tactical flashlights cutting through the darkness. "They're in the tunnel!" I yelled over the roar of the interceptor's engines. "Hold on," Camilla commanded, her eyes fixed entirely on the jagged opening of the sea cave leading out to the open ocean. She pushed the twin throttles completely forward. The interceptor surged forward with terrifying, neck-snapping acceleration. We shot across the dark water of the cove just as the first mercenary emerged onto the steel dock behind us. I saw the muzzle flash before I heard the distinct, rapid cracking sound of automatic gunfire. Sparks showered across the back of the cabin as heavy-caliber rounds slammed into the reinforced ballistic glass. I instinctively ducked, raising my own weapon, but the glass held perfectly, absorbing the lethal impact without shattering. "Do not return fire!" Camilla shouted, violently spinning the helm to starboard to navigate the treacherous, jagged rocks at the mouth of the cave. "We are out of their range in exactly 4 seconds." The interceptor hit the open, churning water of the Atlantic Ocean, the bow lifted violently into the air before crashing down against a massive wave. Freezing salt water sprayed over the dark hull as we rocketed into the dense, blinding morning fog. Within seconds, the jagged cliffside, the glass estate, and the deadly extraction team were entirely swallowed by the thick, gray mist. We were completely untraceable, flying across the open water at a speed that made the horizon blur into a continuous, dark streak. I stayed crouched near the back of the cabin, my breathing ragged, my heart threatening to hammer its way right out of my ribcage. I watched the red tracer rounds fade into the distance, realizing just how incredibly close we had come to simply ceasing to exist. I slowly stood up, sliding the tactical sidearm into the waistband of my dark coat. I walked to the front of the cabin, standing right beside the helm where Camilla was piloting the massive vessel. Her face was illuminated by the soft blue glow of the navigation screens. She looked utterly composed, her jaw set, her hands steady on the wheel. She wasn't running in fear, she was executing a highly calculated tactical retreat. "They missed the deadline," I said softly, the adrenaline slowly beginning to ebb from my veins, leaving me cold and entirely exhausted. "Victoria Sterling doesn't play by rules, Nadia," Camilla replied, keeping her eyes on the digital radar sweeping the empty ocean ahead. She thought she could catch us sleeping and secure the Black Ledger without a fight. "She drastically underestimated you," I murmured, a profound sense of awe mingling with my exhaustion. Camilla finally turned her head, looking at me.
The cold, calculating Alpha Queen softened for a fraction of a second, her glacial eyes sweeping over my face to ensure I was completely unhurt. She reached out with one hand, wrapping her cold fingers around mine. She underestimated us, Camilla corrected softly, intertwining our fingers and squeezing tightly. We stood in silence for a long time, listening to the rhythmic, violent crashing of the hull against the ocean waves. The world we had known in New York was entirely gone, burned to ash by her father's betrayal and the syndicate's greed. We were officially ghosts.
"Where are we going?" I finally asked, looking at the endless expanse of gray water ahead.
"We can't hide forever, Camilla. If the Sterling Syndicate wants that biometric sequence, they will hunt us to the ends of the earth."
Camilla let go of my hand, turning her attention to a secondary, highly encrypted console mounted near the ceiling of the cabin. She typed in a rapid series of commands, the screen flashing with lines of complex, decrypting code. "I have no intention of hiding, Nadia," she stated, her voice hardening into impenetrable steel. "My grandfather built the Black Ledger to protect this family from monsters exactly like Victoria Sterling." The screen beeped sharply, displaying a highly detailed satellite map with a single, pulsing red coordinate located halfway across the world. "For 5 years, my father tore his own empire apart looking for the physical location of the server farm that houses the decentralized network. He thought he could use the dark money to save himself." Camilla looked back at me, a dangerous, utterly mesmerizing smile curving her lips. "He never found it because he didn't know the first rule of the Black Ledger. The biometric sequence doesn't just unlock the accounts, it acts as a homing beacon to the physical servers." I stared at the pulsing red dot on the screen, realization slowly dawning on me. "You know where it is," I whispered, the sheer magnitude of the power she held finally sinking in. "I do," Camilla confirmed. She reached forward, engaging the interceptor's highly advanced autopilot system, locking our trajectory onto a precise, unwavering course. "Victoria Sterling wants to play a game of global leverage," the Alpha Queen declared, stepping away from the helm and turning to face me completely. "She wants to threaten the woman I love to force my hand." She closed the distance between us, her hands coming up to gently cup my face. Her thumbs brushed against my cheekbones, wiping away a smear of dirt from the tunnel escape. "We aren't going to run from the European Syndicate, Nadia. We are going to find the servers. We are going to unlock the Black Ledger." She leaned in, pressing her forehead against mine, her breath warm against my freezing skin. "And then," she whispered, her voice a lethal, intoxicating promise in the dark cabin, "we are going to buy Victoria Sterling's entire world, and we are going to burn it to the ground." The hunt was officially over. The Alpha Queen was no longer the prey. And as the Black Interceptor tore through the freezing fog of the Atlantic, I knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that the Syndicate was about to learn exactly why you never corner a monster in the dark.